Joel, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Good to visit with you.
Yeah, I'm super excited. You and I had a brief chat separately prior to this, and I'm looking forward to diving in because there was a couple things that actually I had written down when we had talked that I was like, okay, I can't wait for this. One is your background and you've lived and breathed the life cycle of businesses, and you also have you got your fingers in a publication that goes out, and you're huge on education, which aligns with everything that we do. And then you talked about your book that you'd written and the CEO white space, and that CEO white space just really hit home to me. So I'm looking forward to diving in. That little brief bio didn't do justice. So why don't you give the listeners a little bit of a background on how you got to where you are today and what you're doing?
Well, so I got an electrical engineering degree in college, thought I wanted to be a PhD and professor, took some graduate math courses, realized I wasn't interested in engineering anymore, but I loved teaching. At the time, to get an MBA, they wanted you to take 60 hours of undergraduate business before you could start your MBA program. That was before the MBA programs got smart and started taking checks from whoever would write them. And, as an arrogant engineer, I wasn't going to take 60 hours of undergraduate business just to get in their MBA program. And so I said, well, I'll show them, I'll start my own business. And pretty soon after that, I became unqualified to do anything else. So you better figure out a way to make it work. And that was over 30 years ago. And I've been fortunate to, I married the right woman, was very helpful. And one of the businesses was really based on her technical prowess and accomplishments. And, but I built several that, sold for nice exits and lets me think about and talk about and teach on, kind of how you do this thing.
I'm super excited to because it's so like when you and I talked prior, the show has been predominantly about buying, growing, and selling companies, and then all the different things that are part of it. And you have a book. Why don't you kind of just describe the book? Because I think there's two different angles we can take in this, which is, value, growth, and the stories about the exits, but also what I think is very interesting is the CEO Tightrope. And understanding that concept is just, I thought was very intriguing because I don't think a lot of people have articulated it the way that you have.
Yeah, so it started, I was chairman of what they call the Austin Technology Council. And, a lot of young CEOs were coming up and I wanted to give back. And so I started teaching a course for CEOs. And because of my teaching background, that kind of felt natural. And then over time, as you develop the course, I'm like, okay, now there's a book here. I kind of get the outline and see how it's going to develop. And I thought when I started writing the book that I would find out that, Harvard had a system for being CEO and Stanford had a system for being CEO. And I would come in as the practitioner and tell them, wow, they're too academic. But what I really found was nobody has really thought about the challenge of being CEO, and particularly as it becomes a real job and scales in an organization. There's certainly a lot of literature that's available now around startup ventures and how you get a product to MVP and a lot of the technical aspects of kind of getting a business going. But what I really see three stages in most businesses: from 0 to 25 employees. Any good, competent business person, project manager type can kind of run that out of their back pocket. And they kind of know what everybody's doing. And while there's a CEO job, a lot of the CEO job happens in your own head. Because typically in that case, not only are you the CEO, but you're the EVP of sales, you're the EVP of marketing, you're the CFO. Maybe you got one technical guy who kind of handles the product side for you, and then you're your partner. But so there's not a lot of communication that has to happen. There's not a lot of strategizing. You just sit there and think for a few minutes and you make all the decisions.
If you can get 2 minutes, right?
Yeah. You have a conversation with yourself and everything's wonderful. As you go from 25 to about 100 employees, though, if you're doing it correctly, what you need to do is give away each of those executive VP that running a group, whether it's sales, marketing, product, finance, customers, HR, you need to hand that responsibility off to somebody who focuses on that all day, every day, such that when you wake up at about 100, 150 people, somewhere in there typically, there's a full-time CEO role. And that full-time CEO role then involves a lot coordinating those key functions, because they're focused all day, every day on sales, but making sure they're aligned with marketing and product and finance and hiring and your customers becomes the real CEO role.
So What I love about this, and this probably gets into the white space, but I want to lay some foundation work here too, as we dive into these concepts and how to actually do this. One is, what is your definition of a CEO? Because there's you got CEO, founder, entrepreneur, business owner. Some of them are interchangeable to some people. Some of them are wildly different depending on who you're asking. So that's one question, and then the other question that I have is that how, like, as we're about to dive into all this stuff, Joel, is understanding the lens of value of enterprise value versus actual just top line revenue. I know we're going to get into this because you talked about hiring people that you don't know their skill set. So I want to table that for a second because I think there's a lot behind that. But your definition of CEO compared to the other words that I had thrown out there.
Yeah, obviously, you start an organization, you're a founder. If you have a significant percentage, you can call yourself an owner. That's great. But like I said, from 0 to 25 employees, there's really not much of a CEO job. And so, in those small stage companies, you may call yourself a CEO, but that's just a very different role than the CEO job at scale. And that's really where I think when I say CEO, I'm talking about somebody that's running something at scale where they have other executives taking care of the principal functions of the organization, and they're not just a one-man band. The analogy I use when I teach my course is, are you Santa and his elves, where Santa does all the fun stuff and the elves are just there to help? Or are you running it like an orchestra conductor, where your job's to maximize the performance of the organization and you're there to lead? Now, you may be a very good musician, but you don't jump into the third chair violin and start playing in the middle of the performance, right? And so CEO is an organizational role. It is not a individual contributor performer role.
And I love that. That was very helpful. And I like the analogies too. And then CEO in your definition does not need to own any of the equity. Is that
Does not necessarily have a major equity stake in the business. No, not at all. You have hired CEOs sometimes, and obviously, in most cases, you want to give them some equity stake to have some in the game, but they do not have to be a majority or even significant shareholder.
I bring that up because we've seen so many times, Joel, that so many entrepreneurs and business owners, see how I even do it, conflate the two, but they conflate their role, their management role, with the equity of their business. I was actually a guest on a podcast recently, and I asked the guy, I was like, well, what do you want? And he's like, I want to be able to take vacation. And you're kind of going through all these things. I'm like, you just conflated your job with your financial holdings, your equity, and your asset. He's like, huh. And I'm like, so there's just no way of, like, people need to, like, extract those two and say, what is the job that you're doing versus the equity? And I see people get that conflated a lot.
Yeah, and probably the most common thing you see with founders is they have an area of specialization. That's why they got into it. Maybe they're a super great technologist. I see a lot of that. As the organization from 0 to 25, they're handling everything, and that's great. But then as the organization grows, they want to still be the technologist, but they don't want anybody else making decisions in the organization. So they have trouble giving up the CEO role to do the chief technology role. And, now you still, CEO has somebody he has to please, right? He reports to a board. And so ultimate authority still rests, with a board of directors. And so often that's the best way to solve that problem is, hey, your job in the company is to be the chief technologist. We're going to go hire a CEO that understands what being a CEO is, but you've still got a position on the board. And if you have a majority ownership position, obviously you still control the shots at the end of the day. But you need to be in a role where you're going to wake up and want to do what that job requires. And the CEO job is an organizational job that requires dealing with people as your primary method of operation, as opposed to things. And a lot of founders like dealing with things, be it spreadsheets, computer code, plumbing installations, whatever the case may be.
So, what is the biggest challenge that you see with people that are founders understanding where they're at and what needs to be done, and then where their journey of their role evolves? I mean, what are the biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think the giving up controls, number one, right? A lot of people become entrepreneurs because they don't play well with others, let's say, right? They have this, inherent bias. I mean, I felt the way I describe it to people is I wanted to be in control of my own fate. I didn't want somebody to walk into my office one day and go, "Hey, we just laid off, half the people. Sorry, get your things and leave." That just felt like working in a large corporation felt like I didn't have control of my fate. And so I wanted to have that control. And so a lot of entrepreneurs start their businesses for that. And when they have some success, the last thing they want to do is give up that control that they feel like to somebody else. But again, if you really understand the CEO role, I think you can put the right people in that role and still have ultimate control of the business, and so don't, kind of conflate the two, because a CEO doing the job right doesn't walk in and just start mandating a bunch of crazy decisions that you wouldn't agree with, right? I mean, that's not what the CEO's role is. You can be CEO and not be the chief visionary for the organization. As CEO, you have to understand and own the vision and promote the vision, but you don't have to be the visionary. I mean, a perfect example, the company I founded with my wife, she was a 4.0 PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Texas, had done...
Smart couple there.
Well, yeah, she's the brains, no question. And so she had done, kind of foundational research in understanding how to manage wide area networks at a time when very few people had even operated wide area networks at scale. And so she had the vision. And, we started the company, and 9 years later, when we sold it, we were still executing that vision. I didn't have to create that vision. I didn't have to expand that vision, but I did have to own the vision and be able to talk about it and explain it to everyone, from the most technical people to the most junior people and customers that we had.
So what I find, I love that. And so what is your definition of the roles or the duties that a CEO should have? Why don't you describe that?
Yeah, there are 5 things that I think a CEO has to do. Obviously, a CEO gets to decide what they do, and often they'll do many other things than these, but these are things that I think you can't delegate to somebody else. So one is what I call owning the vision. Again, it's not creating the vision, but it's taking ownership of it and being able to explain it to everybody, from the most sophisticated person in your industry or business that you deal with to the intern that you bring in the summer. Some people would call that strategy. Well, strategy is a part of that, but I think it's bigger than that. It's mission values are very important. Getting people in the organization that identify with those mission, vision, values, critically important. The CEO kind of shepherd that. Then the CEO has to provide the resources for the organization. Typically, those are capital and human resources, and both of those critically important. You can't run out of money. That's the CEO's responsibility. You can't delegate that. You're ultimately responsible for that. And I think most CEOs don't take near enough active role in the human resources side, and making sure that everyone you hire is buying into that vision you have for the organization. And then once you get going and have some people, well, then we talk about building the culture, right? What culture do we want? And I use the analogy, I've never been someone who liked the family, business is like a family analogy. That doesn't, I have some relatives that would work, that I'd be happy to have work with me. And then there's some that, I wish they maybe weren't my relatives, but I can't control that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I always talked about it as a community, business is a community. People, you want to make an attractive community that people want to join, but people can leave the community, right? If things aren't appropriate for them. And so I think of the CEO as kind of the mayor and police chief of the community, right? They're setting the standards, they're setting what people can get away with. And as you get, 50, 100 employees, you got to start talking about that, because it 0 to 10 or 20 employees, you don't have to talk about culture, because they're going to observe you every day in the operations. And so no reason to talk about it, because the only thing you could do is confuse people if you said you believe something and then you acted in a different way.
Yeah, you got bigger problems to begin with as an individual if you got that going on.
That's right. And so, but when you get, 30, 50, 100 employees, and now in the virtual world too, you're not engaging with people as much. That's when you got to start quantifying and writing down your culture, talking about your culture, telling the stories, so on and so forth. And then, CEO's ultimate decision maker in the organization, but it goes beyond that. You don't want to be in a situation where the CEO is making every decision. You want to be in a situation where decisions are being made at the right level of the organization. And the better you are at doing that, the faster your organization will run, because decisions are effectively the fuel of an organization's engine. Yeah. And so every time you make a decision, you're putting more fuel on the fire. Every time you don't make a decision, you're starving the engine. People are just sitting around waiting, right? And so you got to teach the organization what their authority is, what their responsibilities are, so that they know exactly, very clearly, what decisions they can make. And then when there is a decision that needs to involve you as the CEO, that they're escalating that decision to you very quickly. And then hopefully you're making that decision very quickly as well. And then the final piece, everybody knows the CEO is responsible for delivering performance. That's great, but a lot of CEOs aren't very specific about what that means. A lot of CEOs are like a football coach that walks into the locker room and goes, "Hey guys, go win." And if you did that, the right guard would look at you and go, "Coach, I don't know how to win, but I know how to hit people. Who do you want me to hit?" Right? And so what does a football team do? They develop a playbook such that on every snap of the ball, the 11 people on the field know exactly what they're going to go do, know exactly what their objective is. And if they knock down the left tackle, then he's going to go try to hit the linebacker, right? Most organizations aren't clear on even what good performance is for all their employees, and they haven't bothered to create a playbook for it. And so those 5 things, own the vision, provide the resources, build the culture, make decisions, deliver performance, are what I kind of think about as the key roles and responsibilities of the CEO in any organization.
I think it's fantastic and how well you broke those down. And I want to pull the sports analogy too for a second, because I think this will lead into the second question I'd asked you a little bit ago, which is how do you manage parts of the organization that you're not familiar with or technical expert in? So using the sports analogy, the coach develops the playbook and manages the playbook and knows what the win should look like, especially who their opponent is. So starting at the very top, Joel, and then getting into the functional areas, and which was one of the key points on the interview questionnaire that I was reviewing, is what I have seen in the last, I don't know how many years, is that the big issue with founders is because they've never been through a sale, they don't know what the end win actually means. They don't know what sport they're playing.
Right.
So really, like, with football, tennis, is it soccer? What is actually getting measured here? So what the owner, the original founder, it's revenue, employee count, net income, and just growth percentages. And then at the end, when they think that, as the buzzer's about to go off, they're like, wait a second, it's not that, it's actually enterprise value and equity value. And you're going, whoa. And so if we start there and then go, okay, well, you need to know what game you're playing and what means success, but then you need to translate what you understand about the game and the strategies, and then hire the coach, hire the team. So does that, I know I want to layer above your,
there are about 3 questions in there that
I know it's more of like a story. I'm like, man, what do we do about this?
Yeah. So one question that you started out with that I think, stay with the sports analogy. One thing people assume is that the head football coach, let's say Bill Belichick, knows everything about everybody's position on the team, knows exactly everything everybody should do at all times, and is the expert, if you will, at all facets of football. Bill Belichick didn't even play football in the NFL. Okay. Now, is he knowledgeable about football? Absolutely, he's knowledgeable about football. Is he the best offensive coordinator in the world? Probably not. Is he the best defensive coordinator? Is he the best play caller? Is he the best any of those things? No, that's not his role. His role is to find the people who can be the best at those, coordinate a consistent philosophy such that what his offense does, his defense does, his special teams does, his recruiting does, all coordinate together to execute a vision, right? And so because he does that very well, but he doesn't know how to play quarterback in the NFL. He's never done it. If Tom Brady makes a bad throw, they've got a quarterback coach who's standing on the sidelines, who probably was a former NFL quarterback, who studied how to throw a football extensively. And he says, "Hey, Tom, you dropped your elbow on that one. That's why that ball sailed 10 yards over the receiver's head." So a lot of people get confused as founders because they say, I don't know anything about finance. I can't manage that finance guy. Well, first of all, you need to learn some basics of finance. You certainly need to be able to read a P&L. But no matter what you do, you're never going to know more about finance than somebody that went to school for finance, trained for finance, spent 20 years in finance. That's not the role. I've spent my whole career managing people who knew far more about their job than they did. So we have to go through a coaching process. And that coaching process is setting a set of goals and objectives that we mutually agreed upon is success for that organization, and then holding people accountable. But people don't understand what that word accountable, they think it means you just fire people if they don't perform. Holding people accountable, I like the term objective reality. So when you hear holding somebody accountable, what you should hear is holding people to objective reality. That's your job as the coach, is to say, hey, Tom, no, the receiver didn't run the wrong route there. You overthrew by 10 yards. That's what really happened. Because all of us as humans, natural tendency is it's never our fault, right?
Lie to ourselves, right?
We never want to deal with objective reality. We want to hinge, oh, well, it could have been somebody else if we just closed that deal, if this, if that, right? And so your job as the coach and the best CEOs, hold people accountable, but by just consistently making everybody in the organization deal with objective reality and not letting people slide.
I think you in all of that just answered a lot of the questions. And like, because I think the challenge is like, especially if you've grown a business from a smaller organization to a larger one, and you're moving along the continuum of the 0 to 25 employees up to 150, or it's hard to deal with objective reality when you're having the conversations in your head when you're at 24 employees, right? Yeah, it was because it was the 4th of July. No one was going to, do that deal anyways, right? But as you evolve into this, and then understanding that you have to learn too, because if you've never done that, and I've had other interviews, Joel, where I interviewed Todd Herman, who's got the alter ego effect, talking about like the fake it till you make it, the imposter syndrome. And there's this issue that I've seen where like you get to this point where you're like, I can actually start to admit to others that I don't know all these things. Right? Because it's actually working. The business is actually making profit. And now I need to study at least the basics of how the game is played. What are we solving for? And then how to hire the team. And I just don't think there's anywhere where people have acknowledged that and giving the safe space to say, hey, this is how we learn. And then you're going to have to hire these players that are going to be smarter and potentially more intimidating, but it's okay because you're the owner.
And again, Bill Belichick isn't the expert on every part of playing football and recruiting football. Okay. If you make me CEO of your company tomorrow, okay, I've got 30 years experience being CEO. I've written a book about it. I teach about it. I think I'm a pretty good CEO. I think I know something about the job. You make me CEO of your company. And even if it was in enterprise software, which is kind of my area of expertise, I am unqualified the day I step into the job to be CEO of that company. I don't know near all the things I need to be successful. I would need to know all the employees. I would certainly need to have relationships with my executive team. I would need to understand the customers, deeply. I would have to understand the goals and aspirations of our shareholders and stuff. I'm not qualified in the sense to be CEO at that point. No one's qualified when they first start, but it is a continuous learning process where at least if you understand these are the things you need to be focused on, that you keep getting better every day. And I think that is a lot of founders think, they see some CEOs running some big company and they think they must know everything, they know everything about finance. They know everything. No, we don't know shit about all that stuff.
Well, yeah, tell objective reality, right?
Yes.
So what should a founder do? Is there like a process or like a set of questions that you've run across in your tenure that a founder should do to determine whether they should be the CEO or whether they should hire someone to be the CEO?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, number one, I would go back to the concept of, do you like dealing with things, be that, products, customers, whatever, more than you like dealing with people as an organizational group? Because that's the fundamental difference, even when you move into management, but certainly when you move into the CEO role, is that everything you do is only going to happen through other people really doing it. As CEO,
there's no AI system you can just like deploy all your executives on purpose.
I mean, I'm the CEO of Delta Airlines. I don't fly a plane. I don't service a customer. I don't serve drinks. I don't, build a plane. I don't do anything, right? And so if you don't think you can wake up every day and think first about the people and the organization and how to make them more productive, if your first thought is, I like flying airplanes, then you're probably not cut out to be the CEO. And that's not what you want to do. And that's fine. I mean, again, no problem. Not everybody, I mean, I was 35 before I realized that not everybody in my organization wanted to be CEO. I thought everyone did. They just hadn't gotten there yet. But then it finally hit me. Oh, wait, not everybody's like me, right? That was kind of a revelation. But a lot of people, again, think they need to be CEO to not give up control. And so
well, I was just going to say, yeah, because like you said that you wanted to be CEO and you thought everybody did. And I think that there's like at least half owners out there that don't want to be and are scared to death to tell others that they don't want to be.
Right. That's right. And they shouldn't be. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can, certainly bring in CEOs that will be effective. And, there have been other models too. I mean, I think the other most common model is the traction model that Gino Wickman put forward. It's kind of the same thing. It says you bring in this implementer we're going to call them, something else, but they're really the CEO. And you kind of push the founder to the side, and he kind of it becomes the visionary and, doesn't deal with running the business. And that works at small scale. That doesn't scale up as you get to 50, 100, 200 employees. At some point, that model breaks because you've just created a different bottleneck. But that's the way some people handle it. So sometimes people will bring in a COO. The military has an interesting structure in that they have a commanding officer and an executive officer, and then everybody else reports through the executive officer. Whereas most companies, have a CEO, and then the CEO has 6 or 8 or 10 direct reports, right? But the military set it up for obvious reasons. If the commanding officer was disabled or something in combat, that they had somebody that knew kind of everything that was going on.
Almost so like president and vice president kind of.
That's kind of a setup that can work sometimes as well for the right organization, where you kind of have a junior CEO that knows what's going on, and you have a way to train them and kind of give them more and more responsibility. Then at some point you just step away and say, okay, I'm not CEO anymore. I can see what they're doing. And so that's maybe a middle ground to maintain control while still, giving an opportunity to hand off the CEO role.
To test it out, right? I mean, and like, I think it was either in Traction or Rocket Fuel, one of Gino's books. And I've just, from personal experience and observation, is that it very rarely works out the first time with hiring a CEO.
Yep.
I don't know if you got any comments on that, or is that just kind of the way it is?
Well, I think most people don't understand what the CEO does. So what happens is they tend to hire, if they have a sales background, for instance, they tend to hire the best sales guy to be CEO. So and again, true. That's not, in my 5 jobs, sales was not one of the 5 jobs of the CEO. If you're still doing sales, you're not performing that job as the CEO. You're performing that job. You're still the EVP of sales, which you may be wearing multiple hats. That's fine. May need to at the stage of business you're in. But I get, business owners with 10, 20 employees. I get them and I say, draw out the org chart, what it would look like at 100. Okay. Where you've got full executives in every position. Now tell me which one of those jobs, in addition to the CEO job, are you currently doing? And they'll say, oh, I'm not doing all those. I've got a VP of sales or something. I said, do you know every deal your company's working? Oh, yeah. Well, then you're the VP of sales. Okay. And so you'll find out then they fill in about 5 boxes. I'm really the VP of sales. I'm really the VP of marketing. I'm really the CFO. And then I've got some other people, junior people, doing some things, right?
Can they even, when you have those situations, can they even imagine what it's like to have a 100-person company? Do you think it's people's ability to dream or understand or experience what that is to even get there?
Yeah, I think they can, but I think a lot of people hadn't thought about the implications. It's just one thing when you touch and talk to everybody and personally know everybody in your organization and see them every day. And then at 20, that works. At 100, I'm having trouble remembering some names. I certainly don't know what people are working on. At 200, I'm going to name badges, right? Name badges were invented for CEOs to not look stupid because some employee walks in, they can't remember their name, right?
So, do you think that there's something to do with the fear of brand reputation or individual reputation, of why people why people hold on with a death grip to their operations like that. And like a way of like stark contrast is like, if I was a founder and I've got a service-based business and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm so concerned about what everybody has to think about my reputation. But if I went in and bought a business in the same industry, I would be looking at churn like, oh, it's a 10% churn. Oh, bummer. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like with the complete objective, like, hey, we're still making money, we're doing this. But if it was me who founded, I'd be like, well, 10% of the people hate me every year. I don't know if that kind of jargon or that mental game has anything to do with it.
Yeah, I think, often the people who found businesses are very good at doing something and they feel that other people won't live up to their standards. And other people won't be as good at doing what you're an expert at as you are. But again, that goes back to that objective reality. If you're holding people accountable, if you're forcing objective reality, hopefully you build training for every new employee to bring them up to standards, give them the chance to practice and improve, and you set the bar. What the problem is, a lot of founders and owners, they hire somebody new, give them very little training, give them very little opportunity to learn, and then are shocked that the person didn't do the job as well as they who've been doing it for 20 years did the job. Well, yeah, that's not going to work. You're going to be very unsuccessful hiring people if that's what you think. You need to micro train everybody you hire. So, because otherwise, if you don't micro train them up front, then after 3 months, you're like, I got to micromanage these people. I got to tell them everything to do because they don't know what to do. But if you make the investment up front and say, every new employee, we're going to micro train, we're going to make sure they know everything about their job. Then if they fail, I know the problem's the employee. The problem is in most organizations, they hire somebody, don't give them any training. Then 3 months later, they're like, well, I got to micromanage this person because they're not delivering the results I wanted. Well, I don't know where the problem is. The problem may not be the employee. The problem may be you haven't given them a chance to learn what they needed to learn.
That was micro training versus micromanagement. Huge takeaway there. I like that a lot. What do you do then, like for the CEO who doesn't know a good CFO or a good CIO? And I bring up both of those two positions, Joel, because I had an outsource IT company where the virtual CIO would go in there, and now we've got a fractional CFO services. And what I have noticed is the biggest problem is you got a lot of service providers that slap on a CIO or CFO, marketing thing. And the owners don't know, go like, well, numbers, you must be good. And so there's this problem of like, okay, how do I, like, we hired 2 CFOs when we had our family business because we like to have beers with them. I mean, they knew what, so we didn't know how to judge whether they were good at their job or not. So I know you had some comments on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest way to judge any area of expertise, how does expertise show up? It shows up in being able to predict what is likely to happen in the future. Okay. So if I'm an expert in sales, I can give good forecasts, okay, because I deeply understand the sales process. I deeply understand the customer. And so number one measurement for me, for a sales executive, is accuracy of their forecast, okay? For a CFO, number one measurement for me is accuracy of their cash forecast. Well, when I say that, some CFO is going to go, yeah, but I don't know how much sales is going to sell. And I say, okay, we make that X, okay? And whatever X is, then show me the formula of what the cash is going to be. And we'll plug in X at the end of the quarter, what it turned out to be. Show me that you knew exactly, what the cash was going to be. And a lot of people think, oh, that's easy. Cash forecasting's easy. Boy, I wish it was. You ought to have a 6-month view at least of cash in your business under at least three different scenarios. What if we sell nothing? What if we sell 50% of what we think we're going to sell? What if we're going to sell 75% of what we sell? And then obviously, what if we sell 100% of what we think we're going to sell, and doing that. So it's often the ability to predict the future that's the thing you need to be measuring on. Because if they really know what they're doing, they won't be accurate 100% of the time. Nobody can predict the future perfectly, but they'll be a lot more accurate than people who don't know what they're doing.
That was probably the cleanest and clearest way I've heard anybody describe that, because how you describe that, Joel, like I think about all the situations I'm dealing with clients right now, is the anxiety never goes away when people hire their executives, because they're not good at those executives are not good at predicting the future. Therefore, the buck still goes to the owner, saying, you know what, I'm still living in the same perpetual anxiety, because they're having to forecast everything, because they're the only ones that can still see into the future, and they don't have anybody else that can actually own the outcome.
That's right. Yeah, the CEO manages the future. And people don't understand that. Almost every other position in an organization spends most of their time dealing with problems today or problems from yesterday. They're very present oriented and recent past oriented in their actions, right? The CEO, you're the bus driver. How much time does the bus driver spend looking in the rearview mirror? Oh, you check it occasionally. You hit something and you go, I wonder what that was. Oh, yeah, that was a pothole back there. But you don't stare at the pothole because there's not anything you can do about it at that point, right? What are you trying to do? You're trying to look hundreds of yards down the road so you avoid the next pothole.
Mm-hmm.
And so the CEO job done correctly, you should be spending like 80% of your time, what I call managing the future, anticipating problems, seeing where there are issues, trying to avoid the potholes, and only 20% of your problem dealing with kind of the issue of the day or playing whack-a-mole in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those problems come up and you got to deal with them, and you're the only one that can handle it. Okay, great. But if you're running a good organization, you're spending 80% of your time managing the future.
I interviewed this gentleman years ago. I think it was Jeff Fritz, the 100-hour work year or something. I think it was. This has been years ago, so I don't remember. But he was talking about hiring that CEO. You got to have him 80% of you, and then it's your first bottleneck. I mean, if you go to like manufacturing, like the goal, you're trying to eliminate those bottlenecks.
Yep.
And when you're thinking about, like, and I've witnessed in companies, depending on the industry and everything, obviously, but the main one of the kind of common themes of when can you afford to hire this person. So you're going to have like this slow evolution depending on your growth rate. And so, like, kind of my thoughts behind this that I've seen, Joel, is you go, okay, well, owner that goes from 0 to 25 employees, they're finally making a 6-figure salary after 5 years of risk or whatever the problem is. And they're going, hey, now I've got this and I want to reward myself, take some distributions. And now the lifestyle's creeped up and going, okay, yeah, because everybody tells me I should hire this integrator or CEO. I'm like, well, where's the 200 grand going to come from?
That's right.
So, like,
that's right.
How have you dealt with or seen people deal with the financial implications of that? And
well, that's why it goes back to so important to have these predictive measures, because if I have a good view that I'm confident of cash flow, I'm confident of revenues that's going to come in the door, I can make an educated decision. But most organizations I walk into, they say, oh, I'm thinking about hiring a CEO, but I'm not sure I can afford the 200,000. I say, well, what's cash going to be next month? And they go, I don't know. I mean, it could be this, could be that. I mean, most businesses in America, from a performance perspective, are measured by how much cash is in the account at the end of the month. Okay.
I know.
And so they're not making any plans. So until you get those kind of things in place where you have an accurate cash forecast, you have an accurate revenue forecast you could believe in, you're not probably going to be able to make the jump. And no good CEO is going to take the job either if you don't have those things in place. Because the last thing a CEO wants to walk into is, oh, we can't make payroll Friday, Oh, well, why didn't you tell me that before? You told me everything was great.
Well, we had to give you your signing bonus, and now we have no cash.
Yeah.
Is there I've seen good bonus programs for CEOs. You got some, wages, annual cash bonus based on, metrics for this year, and then a longer term phantom stock plan tied to different events. I mean, is there anything special or unique you've seen?
Well, so I hate incentive compensation. I was in an event that Jim Collins spoke at one time, and somebody asked him about incentive compensation, and he started banging the podium and saying, you can't turn the wrong people into the right people with money.
Interesting.
That the purpose of money is to do no harm, really. It's to, when you find somebody who's the right person, who has that neurotic desire to excel and be great at what they do, you use money to keep them. You don't use money to incent them. And so, yes, you're going to have to pay CEOs a lot of money. You're going to have to give them the opportunity to make good returns. But for the CEO particularly, I think, setting a reasonable salary, not something that's ridiculous, but a reasonable salary, depending on the size of your business, your industry, making that straight cash compensation, and then having an equity stake that if they do great, that obviously that equity stake is going to be worth a lot more, is the way I want the CEO focused. Now, if you're a private business and the equity stake's very illiquid and unlikely maybe to be liquid anytime, that's a little different situation. Maybe you have to do some things with cash, depending. If you're running, some people run businesses just to throw off cash, and if that's your model, great, but then you're probably going to have to compensate the CEO in the same way.
Yep.
But if you're building a business to grow it and sell it, as I think most of your audience probably hopes to do, then the CEO should be willing to bet somewhat on the come. And maybe even potentially invest. I mean, I look at CEO opportunities occasionally, and I'm always, if I think it's a good opportunity for me, I want to put some money at play because I'm willing to bet on myself.
Yeah, right. And you can't underestimate what you just said there, because I mean, that'll really filter out who's potentially believes in the future of the business too.
That's right.
Well, question for you, because I got a lot of clients currently dealing with this, where there's the question of build the strategy, then hire and then go recruit the CEO, or recruit the CEO and then have them build the strategy and then manage to it. And some of the context behind that, Joel, is kind of the intentional growth framework that we created is, hey, once you're done, once you understand the game, now understand the value of your business, build the financial forecast, all the stuff that you talked about. Then it's like, okay, do we believe in our strategies, right? Do we believe in how we're going to go from 10 million to 20 million over the next 4 years? Well, maybe not so much. Maybe that individual, like you said, is more of the engineer type or the salesperson. So this whole strategic planning is outside of their comfort zone. So the question is, you got the numbers. Do you go build some plan or comp plan to then go hire a CEO to then help drive that strategic planning process? Or do you go through strategic planning process and say, okay, here's where we're going and why, and then have them manage it?
Yeah, I think you could do both processes, but just because somebody's a CEO doesn't mean they're the best strategic planner in the world. You can find people who are strategy consultants and good ones that understand. That's a process that people can walk through. If you don't feel comfortable with it, I would not depend on the CEO for coming in and creating the strategy. In my businesses, I've often had somebody in my executive team who is the chief strategy officer, who spend all day, every day thinking about those. What new products are we going to introduce? What different markets should we go to? And that was not necessarily me. Again, I've got to own that vision and facilitate. And I can. I'm a big believer that your strategy ought to boil down to a one-page sheet that has your mission and vision at the top, has your values on one side, and has 4 to 6 key strategic objectives that are clearly measurable, looking out 2 to 3 years. And that's all you need in most organizations. If you make it, I've dealt with one CEO that, we started talking about, oh, well, that's in the strategic plan. So I'm like, can I see the strategic plan? He pulled out a, 17 tab Excel spreadsheet with 500 entries, and I'm like, no, that's not a strategic plan.
That's a task list.
Yeah, that's a task list. And none of your employees are ever going to, this is not helping anybody. So I have a one-page PowerPoint slide that I put up in every business I run that says, here's the strategic plan. It has mission, vision, values, 4 or 5 strategic objectives that we're going to hit in the next 2 or 3 years. That's the strategy, guys. Go execute it.
I love it. So there's an odd question, which is one of the questions that was on the list, the sheet that I got from, I think it was your marketing manager, of, well, it's a good idea to hire an oddball. Was that the right way of wording the question? And I was like, that is such an interesting. I'm super curious on why that's a thing.
Well, so what I argue is, if you do a good job with your culture, okay, and build a very strong culture, then you have access to a wide range of people, and oddballs will be fine because your culture will influence the person. If you have a weak culture, bad culture, then you can't hire oddballs. You got to hire people who kind of will stay in line because your culture is not doing anything to help you. Back to the sports analogy, New England Patriots, great example, right? Some very talented player bombs out at one team. You hear, oh, he's a trouble in the clubhouse. He's a problem. The New England Patriots pick him up. Suddenly he's an all-star wide receiver catching touchdown passes, and you never hear any problems. Why? Because they have a very strong culture. Now, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes people bomb out in New England just like they bomb out other places.
Mm-hmm.
But they are able to use a wider range of talent because of their strong culture than teams that don't have strong cultures are able to use.
So, because the word culture is just kind of like strategy, where you
Yeah,
ask 1,000 people, you're going to get 1,000 answers.
right.
Um, because you've got such a clear definition of how these organizations work with people, what is your definition of a culture, and then how do you or can you measure it?
You can measure the impact of it, is the way I would say it. So, culture to me is the things that get rewarded in an organization. And early stage, that comes directly from the founder. I mean, it's whatever you value and however you treat people. And if you like people who dress in fancy suits more than you like people who dress in blue jeans and t-shirts, that's the culture. Okay, and those
That's
people
such
are
a
going
great way
to
to put it.
get rewarded, right? Now, as you get bigger, it gets often more subtle. And so then you say, how do I measure it? Well, a good culture has high productivity, high employee engagement. And so, the Gallup Q12 survey is the one I've typically used in my career. I think they do a great job of capturing employee engagement. There's a lot of data behind it. They've done millions of them. They can show you how you compare to other groups in your industry. And it's really a task list for good management. Questions like, have you received praise for doing good work in the last 7 days in your organization? That kind of tells you what you need to do. Okay. And if you're scoring low on that, hey, we need to get some recognition out to the team on a regular basis. And so, yeah, you can't, maybe that's not measuring directly the culture, but it's measuring the impact of the culture on the employees. Because if you have a bad culture, you're not going to be productive. You're going to have a lot of issues within the employees. They're going to spend more time talking about the challenges you have than getting their job done.
So, using that definition, like let's say, because I remember doing this with our company, I've watched a lot of our clients go through it too, where someone's trying to hire a CEO. So let's say they've got the foundation, the education based on what you just described, and say, okay, now it's time to hire someone. And they've got a bunch of candidates. And I'm curious of what is the right process and for timeline and the amount of work that should be going into hiring the right person to make sure that the CEO aligns with your culture that you might not have identified, like your preferences, like, right? Are you blue jeans or are you pinstripe suit? Like, so that's a lot of the get to know you, but how do you align the technical abilities or the fit of the CEO and the culture as you're going through a hiring process?
Yeah. So when I hire anybody, and typically in my career, it's been hiring executives and CEOs. But I think hiring anybody, especially in a management role, there are several kind of key categories I look for. So I look for a leadership category, and that involves questions around, hey, if you take this job, who's going to want to come work? Who that you've worked with before is going to want to come follow you? Okay. And I'm looking for names. Okay. I mean, if somebody supposedly claims they've been this great leader who's had all these great results, they ought to have a line of people wanting to come work with them again, because there aren't that many great leaders and great results. Right. Yeah. And so you often with execs, they'll stumble right there. They'll go, well, yeah, I'm sure there are a bunch of people.
So many people,
yeah,
Joel. Yeah. Look at my LinkedIn. There's 4,000.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, give me 3 names that I can call right now and that say they'll want to come, and often that, boy, you learn the leadership question right there, right? The management question, I'm going to say, look, you're now as CEO in charge of all the policies in this company. Okay. Tell me what you think good policies in the company look like from an employee perspective, from a customer perspective, how we engage shareholders. What does that look like? Third, thing, what's your system? What's your routine for running the organization? And, if somebody's a good CEO, they'll say, look, we have a, 9:00 meeting on every Monday that covers these areas. I do one-on-ones with my staff this time. I do an annual review process with them every quarter, yada, yada, yada. If they're coming out of a big sales job or something, they'll say, oh, I work really hard with the team. I try to be collaborative. I build consensus.
Yeah.
What the heck does that mean? I mean, and so you're looking for specificity in these areas. How have you made another favorite question? How have you made any of your employees better in the last year? Because if the executive is a good coach and improving employees, they'll be able to tell you stories of how they've improved employees' performance over the last year. So
that's awesome. I love it. I mean, I could just tell. I mean, like, I'm laughing because I'm like, oh my gosh, had I asked a couple of those questions instead of the ways, or had I been watching for the responses that you just described, I'm just like thinking, oh my God, did I get those bullshit responses?
General specificity, and I learned this kind of backwards. I used to have I once interviewed 252 people in 1 year to hire 100 people. So when you do that, you get pretty good at this, right? Yeah. You figure out kind of what works and what doesn't work. And early on, I had a PR person come into my office, I distinctly remember, and I'd never hired a PR person before. And I had been, back-to-back meetings that day. And usually I'd write down 5 or 6 questions that I wanted to make sure and was prepared. And I really wasn't prepared at all. He walked in and sat down, and PR people, tend to be very put together and, rehearsed, and they understand the value of communication and all this. So she was clearly prepared. And I just looked at her and said, sorry, I don't know anything about PR. I've never hired a PR person. I really didn't have time to look at your resume. Tell me what makes a good PR person. And they spent about 5 minutes in amazing, simple detail, laying out everything that made a good PR person, how she thought about PR, the things she would do in the first 30 days, things she would do in the first 90 days. She was 5 minutes in. I said, you're hired.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And what I realized is people who are really good at something, not only are they good at it, but they've thought a lot about it. I got a chance one time to go play golf with Tom Watson. Super guy, was very excited to go play golf with Tom Watson, right? So we fly up, we meet Tom Watson in the hangar. Tom Watson's talking about golf. We go ride to the course. Tom Watson's talking about golf. We hit balls in the range. Tom Watson's talking about golf. We go play 6 holes. Tom Watson's talking about golf. We get through playing. We have lunch. He does a presentation, tells stories about golf. By that time, I was tired of talking about golf, because, golf's fun, but I'm not passionate about golf in the same way Tom Watson is. But you don't get to be one of the best golfers ever because you spend most of your time thinking about something else. Right. And it's the same thing in business. You don't get to be one of the best PR people because you spend all your time riding horses. You get to be one of the best PR people because you love talking about PR. You've thought about it a lot. You're in tune with the industry, and you can answer those kind of questions with great specificity. You bring in a sales guy and you say, how do you sell? You say, I just don't take no for an answer. I pound the phones. That's not a good sales guy. A good sales guy says, I've looked at your industry. I've divided it into 3 core segments I think we need to attack. I would go hit these 20 customers. I'd start with this marketing program. I'd then follow up with a phone call. Then I'd go visit, whatever, right? They're very specific about what they need to do. And so that's one of the ways to detect, even though you may know nothing about a topic, if they can't explain it to Richard Feynman, the famous, if you can't explain it to an 8-year-old, you don't understand it. Mm-hmm. And so the people you're interviewing should be able to explain their job in great detail if they're portraying themselves as an expert.
I absolutely love that. And I think that's literally tying right back to one of your earlier statements about their ability, meaning the executive's ability to predict the future.
Yes.
Right. So they're generally specific about how they're going to predict the future and what they're going to do versus they have a plan versus camaraderie and pound. I love it. I know we're rounding out to the end here. Joel, this has been honestly just a blast because this is something that it's got to be almost every single one of our clients or the people that have come on here. They haven't figured out how to successfully hire a CEO to do this job that you're talking about. Therefore, and here's where I get so bummed because the results are of that. They sell the business because they're too exhausted and the anxiety's there, or they're not going to sit there. Like they might not want to do an ESOP and take a seller's note at 12%, for 2/3 of it because they're terrified the plan's not going to get executed and the money's not going to get returned. Yep. And it's like, there's hiring a CEO and building a business like this is like the best way to have your backup plan, which is it kicks off a bunch of money and you can go do whatever the hell you want while your company's managing itself. But
That's right.
people haven't been able to clearly say, here's how I'm going to do this and have confidence. It's that lack of confidence when I've watched this right now because of the out of the blue offers that are coming out from private
Sure.
equity and the money that's sloshing around.
Yep.
People that are really confident are going, oh, well, actually, I would sell for the money for these reasons because there's an out, there's a trap door,
Yep.
versus going, no, look at my 5-year plan. That offer is nowhere close to our 5-year plan. And so I think you have clearly and actually given people things to think about that. I mean, I think there's enough anxiety out there on this topic that people should be doing whatever they can to figure out how to solve this problem.
Sure. Yeah. So, be happy to engage with your listeners. They can go to joeltrammell.com and
Give us the book, the links, everything like that. We could put in the show notes and everybody can go look at it.
If the book's the CEO Tightrope, and then we're going to release probably early or at the end of this year or early next year a book on management that kind of puts a system around management as well, so people can understand that. Very important in your organization as it grows to build a consistent management system. And then I do a lot of my material through joeltrammell.com. We offer an assessment. You can go look at and take the assessment on kind of where your business is and where you are as a CEO. And certainly love to engage with people who are dealing with these kind of issues.
I love it. Joel, one last question for you. Forgot to ask you earlier, is your definition of the word intentional.
Intentional.
Like if you were to go back to your former self, call it 20 years old or something, you say, this is what intentional means. How would you describe it to yourself?
Yeah, I think, thoughtfully having created a rational approach. I see a lot of people that have intentions, but there's no thought behind it. There's some random. I want to be a billionaire. Okay, that is not
great.
being intentional. That's dreaming, hopes and dreams. And one of the things that entrepreneurs really fundamentally do is convert hopes and dreams to rational plans.
I like it. Joel, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Glad to be with you, Ron.